Welcome to another edition of Kirby Podcasts. In this edition, we will be talking about home reading journals. I know that for a lot of families, they wonder, what is it that Mr. Kirby is looking for anyway? So, the purpose of this podcast is to talk to you about what I'm looking for in the home reading journals and what you can do to achieve it. Let's start by looking at the rubric. This is the rubric that I will be using this year to grade the home reading journals. You can see that there are 5 sections to the rubric. Let's talk about them very quickly. First, this idea of addressing the rules of fiction and or other higher order elements, and it says see below. On the actual rubric, the other part will be right below this, and we'll talk more about the other higher order elements in just a moment. As for the rules of fiction, I already have a podcast that goes through what they are and what they mean. In this, I don't only want to see a list of here's my protagonist, here's his reason, here's his journey, here's his obstacles, this is what he learned. If you turn it into a list, you're missing the point. The point of the rules of fiction is to help you think more deeply about your book and other books that you've read. That's where the other higher order elements come in. So it's not simply a list of 5 things. Moving past that is this idea of using effective reading comprehension strategies. For the students who I'm grading, I'm not worried about whether or not you're a good reader. I know you're a good reader. I know you can comprehend what you're reading. What I'm really looking for is a higher order use of these reading comprehension strategies. I don't want to see summary. I know you can summarize. I know you understand basically what you read. I want to know, are you going deeper with it? Are you making inferences? Are you asking really deep questions that go beyond just the story where you are this week? Sometimes you still need to do those kinds of things, ask a really specific question about something that's going on in the story right now, make a prediction about who you think might be the murderer or the main bad guy or whatever, and that's okay, and you can talk about that some, but I really want to see some bigger inferences about bigger ideas, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. Then we have the idea of growth and effort. For some students, effort is the bigger part. It's really easy for me to see if you just wrote it the night before or maybe 2 nights ago and it's a paragraph and a half long. I know that nobody who's giving me a reading journal gives me one that has that little bit done and really put a whole lot of effort into it. So for some of you guys, effort is a huge piece of the grade. For other people, you're always put effort in. What I'm really looking for is growth. Are you growing as a reader and a writer and a thinker with your home reading journal? If your home reading journals this year look the same as they did last year, you're not really growing a whole lot. I'm looking for more than just that list of 5 things. If that's all you give me every time, that's not growth. You should be stretching yourself to think about new things, think about more things, and go deeper and further than you did before. Response to feedback kind of goes into all of those different things. When I write you a letter that says, I really want you to go deeper, I really want you to ask deeper questions, I really want you to make more inferences, I really want you to compare this book to other books or other stories or other series, I really want you to think about why the author might be having these things happen to these characters, then I would like for you to address those things. If your next one comes back and doesn't address any of my questions, it's really frustrating and it makes me feel like you're not really reading my feedback. You basically open it up when it's time to write your new journal entry, you write it down, you turn it in, and you're never actually looking at what I'm writing to you. The purpose of the home reading journal is to have this dialogue back and forth where I'm helping you become a better reader. Now, for some of you, it's very obvious you always look at feedback. So if that's you, this isn't really for you. But there are some of you, and you know who you are, who don't actually read my letters until it's time to write a new one, and you don't have time to really respond to my feedback. Lastly is grammar, capitalization, and punctuation. This is going to be a lot bigger this year. We've already discussed as a team that we're not going to accept work that doesn't have proper capitalization and periods. If you turn in a reading journal that does not have proper capitalization and periods, I will not grade it. I will read through it as soon as I start seeing it. You know, everybody makes one mistake or so, but once I start seeing several, I'm going to hand it back and make you go back and edit. You don't have to rewrite the whole thing, but you will have to go back and edit and turn it in again, and you will not get full credit after having done that. It's really important for you to start writing your journal long enough in advance that you can proofread and make sure all of those things are done. Because as a fifth grader, you should be capitalizing names. You should be capitalizing the first letter of a sentence, and you should be putting periods at the end of your sentence every single time. Now let's look at the bottom half of the rubric. On the left, you see what I see in your entry. That's what I see this week. On the right, you see what I want to see more of in your entry. And for the most part, they're similar. I want to point out that very first one, too much summary. Some of you guys are still spending half of your journal entry on telling me what's going on in your story. If you're doing a good job explaining your inferences, then your summary is useless. I'll know what's going on in your story by what you're telling me in the rest of your entry. It's okay to give me a sentence, maybe two, about what's going on right now, or what's going on as you're thinking, but I don't need a whole paragraph telling me what's going on since the last time you wrote me. That's just a waste of my time and a waste of your time. I know you're a good enough reader to do that. I don't need to see it again. This is what I want to see. How is the protagonist growing and changing? I want to see you to compare two different books or stories, or maybe more than two books or stories. And I want to see some symbolism. We'll talk more about symbolism as the year goes on. I don't want to spend a lot of time right now on that. All of that leads into what I would ask for next time a lot, which is inferences beyond the part you are reading about right now. I'm going to give you really quickly one example of an entry that I don't think is what I'm looking for, and an example of an entry that shows more about what I'm looking for. And we'll get into this idea of inferences that go beyond the part you're reading right now. You'll also notice at the bottom of this list is the same things. How does the protagonist growing and changing, comparing two stories or books, effort, and then symbolism again. So, very quickly, I'm going to read you this passage from Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, and then we're going to show you two entries. Who do you imagine wants to attack children like yourselves? Inquired Professor Umbridge in a horribly honeyed voice. Let's think, said Harry in a mock thoughtful voice. Maybe Lord Voldemort? Ron gasped. Lavender Brown uttered a little scream. Neville slipped sideways off his stool. Professor Umbridge, however, did not flinch. She was staring at Harry with a grimly satisfied expression on her face. 10 points from Gryffindor, Mr. Potter. The classroom was silent and still. Everyone was staring either at Umbridge or Harry. Now let me make a few things quite plain. Professor Umbridge stood up and leaned toward them, her stubby-fingered hand splayed on her desk. You have been told that a certain dark wizard has returned from the dead. He wasn't dead, said Harry angrily, but yeah, he's returned. Mr. Potter, you have already lost your house 10 points. Do not make matters worse for yourself, said Professor Umbridge in one breath without looking at him. As I was saying, you have been informed that a certain dark wizard is at large once again. This is a lie. It is not a lie, shouted Harry. I saw him. I fought him. Detention, Mr. Potter, said Professor Umbridge triumphantly. Tomorrow evening, 5 o'clock, my office. Now, let's look at a sample of what I don't really think I'm looking for. I'm reading Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, and right now Harry is in class with Professor Umbridge. She is being really mean in class. I wonder why she is being mean. Maybe she is working for Voldemort. Harry has to go to detention because he spoke up to Professor Umbridge and said that Voldemort was still alive. I think this is unfair because he is alive even though Professor Umbridge said it's a lie. I don't get why Ron and Hermione don't stick up for Harry. They are supposed to be his friends, but they aren't speaking up, so now he has to go to detention alone. How rude. Hopefully you can see this entry really just rehashes that one little section. It doesn't get into anything more deep than that. It's really just a rehash, even though there's a wondering, kind of a prediction, a little bit of inferring, and some personal connections. It's really not that deep. It's just about what's going on right now in the story. This is really not going to get you a great grade. Here's an example of a deeper entry. Sample of what I am looking for. I'm reading Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. I'm having a really hard time figuring out Professor Umbridge. She is so evil. I can't figure out if she's working for Voldemort or not, but it doesn't really matter. She's evil no matter what. Harry seems to be dealing with her on his own. I've noticed this happening more and more, where Harry is having to deal with bad situations alone. I think this is one of the things that Rowling is trying to show in these books. It's weird because in the first couple of books, she spent a lot of time teaching Harry that he doesn't have to do everything on his own, but now it's almost the opposite. I guess that's how she's showing Harry that he's growing up, that he can face his own fears and fight his own battles. I've noticed that happens in a lot of the books I read. For example, Gregor had to fight the Bane on his own at the end of the last book. So you see how you're getting beyond just this story. You're going into this idea of Harry and how he's growing as a protagonist throughout all 5 books thus far, and you're comparing this book to the Gregor books. Now, if you haven't read the Gregor books, you obviously can't make that comparison, but you've read other stories where you could start making comparisons about how characters seem to grow and change similarly throughout all these different books. So, here's some reminders. First, proofread for capital letters and periods, and underlining the title, which you'll notice that Mr. Kirby forgot in both of his slides. Read, reread, and reread your entry to make sure it makes sense. Had I reread my slides, I would have caught my underlining mistake. Talk to your parents about what you're noticing in your story. They can help you think about it. Think about why the author is creating certain situations. Remember, everything in fiction is made up. Anything that happens to these characters is something the author chose to have happen. Why did they do that? Why that thing? Why is it a rainstorm? Why is there something bad happening right now? Why is there water in the way? Why did his parents die? Why did his parents leave? What's going on? Why are these things happening? Everything happens for a reason. Think about if you can figure it out. Look for symbolism. Some of those things I was talking about, especially with water, comes in there. Don't summarize. I do not want to see a long summary of your book. And the biggest one, you cannot think deeply about a shallow book. If you are reading a book like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, there's not a whole lot of deep thinking going to happen because it's not a deep book. Some books have more symbolism, more thought, more depth than others. If you want to be able to think deeply, you've got to read a deep book. Now, that doesn't mean you can never read a shallow book. Many students read a deep book and then a shallow book in between and only write to me about their deep books. That's fine. Shallow, easy, fun books, they're like brain candy. I have no problem with you reading them. I don't want you to write your home reading journals about them because they are not going to get a deep grade. You can't get a good grade at a 10 if you are not reading a deep book. It's just not going to happen. So, I hope this helps you know what I'm looking for in the home reading journals. I hope that you can watch this and rewatch it to come up with some other ideas of how you could go deeper. Later on, I will have more podcasts, I hope, that will talk some about symbolism and some of the other things you can continue to do to make your home reading as deep and meaningful as possible.